So coming up this Friday, we are going to be having the round one, week two card, I guess is what you would call it for the PFL tournament. It's going to be the men's bantamweight and the women's flyweight. And this is going to be the first round of the tournament for those two weight classes. If you guys don't know, they did recently change the tournament format of the PFL tournament. They now no longer have a silly points system. It is a 8-person single elimination tournament, win or go home. And I think it just makes so much more sense. This is going to be the quarterfinals, so if you win this fight, you then go into the semifinals. If you win that semifinal fight, you then go into the finals. It just all makes so much more sense than the playoff system they had last year. And I do think that it actually created some pretty good fights in last week's card, which was, of course, the men's welterweights and the men's featherweights, if I am correct about that. This card, as I did just say before, men's bantamweight, women's flyweight. I will just disclose this though now in the intro, because I'm pretty confident that the card could change. 50% of fights on this card are short notice bouts. I was looking into this card 2 days ago. I looked into Tapology yesterday. The card was completely different, and I thought to myself, oh. So hopefully the card doesn't change too much more. Quite literally 5 cancelled bouts on a 10 bout long card. Pretty interesting stuff from the PFL, but that's what we've got going on right now, unfortunately, with all of these cancellations. I don't think I have much more to say. I do have an article, of course, for this card out on the We Want Picks website. I'm going to do an article for the LFA card. Betsam, Jacob, Angelo are all going to put up heaps of bets for UFC 314. I'll put up some bets as well, and I'll just talk about them in the Discord, and that's free to join the Discorders, of course, but it's $10 per month for the website premium subscription. I think that all makes sense. I'll see you guys now in the predictions for this card. So right now, the first fight on the Tapology layout of the card is going to be Ekaterina Shakalova fighting against Saray Orozco at the women's flyweight division. And I do just want to start out by saying that I have some concerns about the weight cut for Shakalova. Shakalova throughout her entire career had been fighting at women's bantamweight, but in her last 2 fights for the Bellator and the PFL, she had actually been fighting at 145 pounds. So now her next fight is going to be at 20 pounds less than the last 2 fights that she has been competing in. So I'm a little bit interested to see how she does make that weight in this matchup. But if she does make the weight in this matchup safely, I do believe that she can win this matchup. Shakalova, quite an interesting sort of fighter because she is a very high volume striker, but the way that she fights is she'll spend a lot of time dancing around outside of range, and then she'll just dive in, throw a boxing combination, duck her head, and dive back out, and she does this on repeat throughout every single moment of the fight, with occasional takedown attempts as well. She did this a lot against Aspen Ladd, and in my opinion, this wasn't a very good Shakalova performance because she spent a lot of time in this fight just punching air. She wasn't able to land really anything on Aspen Ladd, which I thought was very awkward because Ladd, if you watch Aspen Ladd fight, you'll know what she does. She genuinely just stands there with her chin up in the air without really doing anything on the feet, and even then, she wasn't really shooting takedowns against Shakalova either, which was pretty interesting, but when she did, the size difference was very apparent, and Shakalova did struggle in that matchup. In the past, though, against Diana Silva, this was her Bellator debut. Diana Silva was actually ranked number 7th in Bellator in the women's featherweight division, and Shakalova, I thought, looked quite good in this one. She was able to land a lot of her shots. In the end, was able to get some takedowns as well. Got a takedown at the very end of the 3rd round, which potentially actually secured her the decision because it ended up being a split. But I do think in this matchup now against Orozco, the way that she fights is going to be quite effective. Saray Orozco, the way that Orozco fights, she just clinches up against the cage and doesn't really do anything else. And when she does have to deal with any sort of pressure coming her way, she just backs up, she puts her arms out there, and then she kind of like moves her head to the side and just kind of hides, and then eventually finds the clinch again. And if Shakalova's entire style is based on her pressuring forward, coming forward and throwing combinations up and close, that's going to be very effective against someone like Orozco, who doesn't deal with pressure very well. And if she is getting hit while moving backwards, she doesn't throw anything. She just puts her arms out there. And I think that Shakalova, if she can kind of increase that accuracy, can find a lot of success in this matchup here. Orozco, honestly, I thought she put up a pretty good fight against Sumiko Inaba in her debut. Sumiko Inaba is a fighter that Bellator had been building for a very long period of time, was able to put up a pretty competitive matchup there, but once again, of course, it was Inaba that was able to land a lot of strikes against Orozco, and Orozco's just lack of aggression and lack of ability to deal with pressure that leads to her demise in that one. And I do think that Shakalova can go out there and do the same thing, but I do think that this fight is a little bit closer than the Tapology predictions suggest. 96% on Shakalova, minus 360 on Shakalova. I think that's a bit wide, I'll be honest with you guys, just because I haven't been too impressed with the accuracy of Shakalova's striking. And now we have Marcirley Alves fighting against Vilson and Ndregjoni. I think that this is guaranteed to be a fun matchup. There is going to be a very significant size difference between the two, though, because Marcirley Alves is a very small guy for bantamweight. I do believe that he probably could make flyweight, standing at 5'4". He's been very small compared to his previous opponents, and Vilson Ndregjoni, in general, is actually a very big guy for the weight class. Vilson Ndregjoni is going to probably have a pretty considerable size advantage in this matchup. He had a pretty considerable size advantage against Justice Torres. He had a size advantage against Wagner Noronha, and he was able to make that size advantage work. Now, he did lose the matchup to Justice Torres, but he was still able to find his own success in moments there, and the size advantage was useful against Wagner because he was able to use it to shoot for takedowns. Marcirley Alves is a very high volume striker, and he doesn't spend much time really at all without throwing something. He's always throwing leg kicks out there. Genuinely, I think he throws a leg kick at least every 10 seconds of the fight, and he likes to close the distance and throw his strikes there. He's very accurate with his shots, and he picks his shots very well, but he has shown a little bit of a weakness to takedown defense in the past. He did fight against someone called Savajon Kamadov, who was 15-0 at the time and is 16-0 now because he beat Alves, and he was just dominated in the wrestling in that matchup. And although he was fighting a very good wrestler who was bigger than him, he didn't show much ability to get back up after taken down. And I do think that that is a bit of a red flag when you actually look at this matchup here against Vilson Ndregjoni, who I would mostly describe as a striker himself. Ndregjoni is a lot more patient, picks his shots a lot more patiently. He looks for counters, but he does shoot for takedowns on occasion as well. He was finding success against Justice Torres by shooting his takedowns. He was finding success against Wagner Noronha by shooting takedowns, and then eventually he landed the head kick that knocked him out. He's also shot for takedowns in other previous matchups, but he's also shown a very high level amount of power by knocking out a lot of former prospects. Mark Gray was on a pretty good run before he ran into Ndregjoni, and Ashik Ajim was also on a bit of a run as well before he ran into Ndregjoni, and Ndregjoni was able to knock them both out. I do believe, though, that Marcirley Alves should be able to find enough success on the feet in this matchup to be able to squeak out a decision. And the reason why I'm going with this is because I believe that this matchup is very similar to the matchup that Ndregjoni did have against Justice Torres. Justice Torres was not as small as Alves, but he did fight in a very similar way that Alves does, where he is a guy that likes to pressure forward, throws a very significant amount of volume, and the takedown defense wasn't amazing in that matchup for Torres, but eventually the volume did wear down Vilson Ndregjoni. That was a 5-round matchup, but you could see that as early as the second round, you could tell that Torres' volume was starting to add up, and he was able to land that volume. And for that reason, I am siding with Marcirley Alves here. This is not a high confidence pick at all, but I do believe that Alves with his volume is going to find the moments on the feet to end up winning a decision here against Ndregjoni, who I believe is going to come into this matchup with a very wrestling heavy style. And maybe we do just see Ndregjoni go out there and control Marcirley Alves because he's got such a significant size advantage. But I do believe that if Alves can get range, can get distance, and can defend some takedowns, I think he's going to find the moments on the feet out of the two. So I'm going to go with Alves to win this matchup by decision, but it is not a high confidence pick at all. And now we have Elora fighting against Jena Avsaragova. Honestly, I went into this tape study thinking that I was going to pick Elora with a pretty decent amount of confidence, to be honest, because Elora has been on the radar of a lot of people for a pretty long time now. She was rumored to be potentially looking at a UFC Dana White's Contender Series contract, but the PFL, of course, have now scooped her up, so that's not going to happen. And I looked into the tape of Dana, And I have to be honest, I was not very impressed at all. She does throw with a lot of heat, but it's very sloppy. She's just kind of spends a pretty like large period of time on the feet chasing her opponents around, throwing very wild hooks, and then when she does get takedowns, I think that's kind of when her skill set really does get showcased, because if she does get takedowns, that's when she then has very strong top control, very good ground and pound, and also pretty solid grappling as well. Diana Avsaragova is a fighter that Bellator were building for a very long time. I think there's very obvious reasons why, because she is very attractive, but she did recently lose to Justine Kish in her last fight, which was now 18 months ago, 19 months ago at this point. And towards the end of this sort of period of time when she was getting built up before she lost, she was starting to abandon what she was actually quite good at. Diana is actually a pretty good wrestler. However, it was kind of in these matchups that she was starting to abandon that wrestling and was choosing to become a striker, which was very odd, because although she did win this matchup against Alejandra Lara, you could tell that Diana's striking just isn't really that good. And the reason why is because she's just so slow. She will telegraph everything that she throws. Her opponents will throw and she won't react to it until it's already landed. And just kind of, she backs up as well. She doesn't deal with pressure very well at all. And if she doesn't deal pressure very well at all, she's now finding someone that, despite having not much technique, is going to be coming forward and just throwing absolute bombs. So I think that Dana can actually find that success by coming forward, by throwing that high volume, by throwing those high power strikes, and backing up Diana to end up winning a decision. So I'm going to pick Elora Dana to win this matchup by decision. We can now move up to Jena Bishop taking on Kana Watanabe. This is a grappler versus grappler matchup in the women's flyweight division. I'm picking Jena Bishop in this matchup, but it is a pretty low confidence pick there. I think it kind of just comes down to a couple of things. Well, it comes down to one thing, really. This fight will go down to the ground at one point. Kana Watanabe is a pretty solid wrestler, but she is not a good enough striker to win a fight on the feet for 15 minutes. And if Kana Watanabe isn't shooting for takedowns, Jena Bishop will. And if the fight does get down to the ground, grappler versus grappler, I think that Jena Bishop, the former world no-gi champion and also a former world champion in, I believe it was jiu-jitsu in the brown belt category as well, I think Jena Bishop can find the submission opportunities against Kana Watanabe, who has been caught in submissions in the past and was caught in a submission very recently against Liz Carmouche with only about 7 seconds left. In that fight, Carmouche was able to find a submission off her back. Kana has been caught before, and I do believe that Jena Bishop will be able to catch her as well again. I do believe that if Kana Watanabe was a more well-rounded fighter, if her striking was better, not only would I feel a bit more confident to actually pick her to win this matchup, I think that Kana Watanabe could have potentially become a world champion fighting for the Bellator promotion, because I think ultimately it was the lack of damage maybe that is why she lost the matchup to Alimale McFarlane, even though I think that she won. But I think in this matchup, though, the fight's going to go down to the ground, and I think once it does, Jena Bishop is going to hold the advantage. So I'm going to pick Bishop to win this matchup by submission. Jena Bishop actually is the favorite as well in this matchup, which I think was a little bit of a surprise to me. Jena Bishop is minus 165. Now we move up to Mattos fighting against Jake Hadley. It is worth noting that this is a short notice bout, except instead of one of these guys filling in on short notice for an opponent, these guys actually had fights booked but against different people, and then those fights fell out for one reason or another, and now they're fighting against each other. So it's Mattos fighting now against Jake Hadley at 135 pounds. Jake Hadley, of course, now fighting for the first time outside of the UFC. And I don't think he wins. I'm not super confident in this pick, but I do believe that Mattos actually has quite a lot of ability to win this matchup. Mattos is a very dynamic striker. He's a pretty big guy for the division, although standing a little bit shorter, he does have a pretty wide build, and he's got a lot of arsenal in his striking ability. The one problem that potentially there is for Mattos is the same issue that we saw with Marcirley Alves, is he just fought a very dominant Russian wrestler in Kasumov, and in that matchup he did show not much ability to get back up after getting taken down. Now, I don't think that Jake Hadley has the same sort of level of dominance on top as Kasumov does have, but I think it is something to worth note because Jake Hadley is a grappler, even though recently in his UFC run he was starting to rely on his boxing a lot more. I think if he does try to rely on that boxing a lot more against Mattos Mattos, it is going to get him in a bit of trouble. We have seen Mattos Mattos really be able to showcase his striking ability in the past. I thought he looked very good in this matchup against Richard Palencia. In that fight against Palencia, he was not only able to defend takedowns, he was also able to get takedowns as well, and ultimately on the feet was just showing a very good ability overall. And I do think against Jake Hadley, if this is going to be a striking matchup, I like what I saw out of Mattos. I think Mattos is the better striker out of these two guys here. If Hadley wants to grapple, I think that increases his chance to win. But I'm going to ultimately side with the underdog here in Mattos Mattos. I like this guy striking. I like the opportunities that he's going to present for himself. He might even shoot for his own takedowns, which could be for better or for worse. But Mattos Mattos, at a time of me recording this video, is a plus 110 underdog, and I think it's the striking that's going to get it done for Mattos Mattos to win by decision. And now we move up for Liz Carmouche versus Ilara Joanne. I would feel a lot more confident in Liz Carmouche if she wasn't 41 years old. I do think that eventually that age is going to catch up to where I've been in a smaller weight class now, cutting down to 125 pounds. Even though she isn't the biggest fighter for 125, eventually that could potentially catch up to her, but she has found a lot of success recently, of course, capturing that Bellator title and defending that Bellator title, and then also, for some reason, having a trilogy bout with Juliana Velasquez in the PFL after she had defeated Juliana Velasquez twice for Bellator. And she was able to defeat Juliana Velasquez the exact same way every single time. And that was with the wrestling, it was with the control, and it was with the grappling. And I think against Ilara Joanne, that's going to be very useful because now, for a very, very rare occurrence for Liz Carmouche, she is going to hold the size advantage here. She's fighting a smaller opponent, Ilara Joanne, who is quite one-dimensional, is pretty much only a striker. And Liz Carmouche, we know what Carmouche does well. She just kind of boxes, closes the distance, then looks for takedowns up against the cage, gets those takedowns, and once she has top control, she'll look to control the fight and then work for submissions, work for some ground and pound. And I do believe that against Ilara Joanne, this is a good matchup for Liz Carmouche. Liz Carmouche is minus 450. It is quite wide when you really do think about it, being 41 years old. But I also think about this matchup as well, and I think how could Ilara Joanne win this matchup? And we would need to see Ilara Joanne defend the takedowns of Liz Carmouche and then beat Liz Carmouche on the feet. And Liz Carmouche is not very weak in the striking. Carmouche is a pretty well-rounded fighter now at this point in her career. She's had 30 professional bouts. And I think that ultimately, even if the fight did come down to a striking matchup, I think Carmouche could hold her own, but it's going to come down to those takedowns, which I do believe that Carmouche is going to get. And not only do I believe that Carmouche is going to get the takedown, I'm actually going to pick Liz Carmouche to win this bout by submission against Ilara Joanne, who I do believe is just a little bit of a one-dimensional striker. The next fight that we're going to be moving up to is in the bantamweight division. This is another short notice matchup. Kasumov is going to be fighting against Justin Wetzell, and Kasumov was preparing for a different opponent, and Justin Wetzell has accepted this fight on short notice. And it's a pretty tough task for a short notice opponent because Kasumov has actually proven to be quite good. He's won 2 fights in Bellator against 2 pretty decent opponents. He went out there first and beat Josh Hill, and then he went out there against Mattos Mattos, who I just was talking about earlier, to pick Jake Hadley, and in those matchups he was able to get the takedowns. Now, not as successfully against Josh Hill, but against Mattos Mattos, once he got those takedowns, he did find a lot of success doing them. He does actually remind me a lot about Umar Nurmagomedov, because once he gets that takedown, he is very dominant on top. He doesn't let you stand up, and the ground and pound is pretty good as well. Justin Wetzell is a pretty talented guy. I actually thought that at one point we might actually see him in the UFC, considering he was on a pretty nice win streak, but maybe being at 33 years old, he was just a little bit older for what they were looking for. But he's been on a pretty nice run for a couple of different promotions now recently. He recently went out there and beat Beksod Usmanov, who was, of course, on the Ultimate Fighter Season 29, I believe it was, but I could be wrong. And Beksod Usmanov was actually wearing his Ultimate Fighter shorts when he fought against Justin Wetzell And then before that, he has been fighting for a couple of other different promotions as well, of course. Wetzell has actually been quite big compared to a lot of his opponents at bantamweight, which should be a nice little change for Kasumov, because usually it's Kasumov who can sport a bit of a size advantage. So it'll be interesting to see how we can deal with another pretty big guy who also has a lot of skills in the wrestling. Justin Wetzell's striking, I think, is quite good as well. He does like to close the distance a lot to set up his takedowns. When he does close the distance, he likes to throw his combinations up and close, throws a lot of hooks, has pretty solid striking defense. The problem with Kasumov is we genuinely don't really see him strike all that much. It's because he wants to get the takedown, and that very short reach of his doesn't really allow him to get much going unless he is very close in the clinch anyway. So it's going to be just kind of come down to, can Kasumov go out there, get the takedowns against Justin Wetzell? And I honestly think that he can. You've got to consider that this is now on short notice. I don't know how short notice it is, but preparing for Kasumov, a guy that is going to, well, has proven to have very dominant wrestling on short notice, I think it's going to be a tough task. So I like Kasumov to go out there and win a decision, getting that takedown, getting that control time, and finding success there. This is another short notice fight as well. As I said, 50% of these belts are short notice. Mando Gutierrez has stepped in on short notice now to fight against Francesco Nuzzi. I do like Francesco Nuzzi. Not 100% sure how I meant to pronounce his name, I apologize. However, I worry about his inactivity, man. Like, this guy has so much skills on the feet. Francesco is a super dynamic kickboxer. He looked incredible in his last bout against Farbod Iran Nishad. He defended a couple of takedowns. He made a couple of reads. Iran Nishad was like ducking his head every time he shot for a takedown. And eventually, our boy Francesco just thought, no more of that. And as soon as Iran ducked his head, he just threw a head kick up there and knocked out his opponent very, very impressively. He's got a good win here over Bernardo Sapai. That was 4 years ago. His last one before that was a year and 9 months before that happened. And then he had an unfortunate matchup in the PFL. This guy just does not fight often enough. And it's kind of frustrating to me because I wanted to see more tape on how good his takedown defense is. Because Mando Gutierrez is going to shoot for takedowns. There's no doubt about that in my mind. Gutierrez is a grappler. I would actually say, I said this in his breakdown against Raul Rosas Jr. when I picked Raul Rosas Jr. to beat him on the Contender Series. I said, Mando Gutierrez and Raul Rosas Jr. fight in the exact same way. I just think that Raul Rosas Jr. is better at it. So you can kind of just imagine that. Imagine Raul Rosas Jr. That's not Raul Rosas Jr. That is Mando Gutierrez. Of course, as well, he has actually had more opportunity to get into the UFC. He fought on the Ultimate Fighter Season 31. I think this was actually the season Bekzod Usmanov was on, now that I really think about it. But he fought against Cody Gibson there. He got knocked out in the first round. And then he got knocked out by Cameron Smotherman, who's now in the UFC. And then he's recently been fighting a couple of guys. Eric Vo is just kind of like a guy that fights literally anybody. I believe that Eric Vo even fought Austin Bashi as well at one point, but I should digress. Had a close fight over in Japan against Joji Goto. He's a grappler, taking on a striker. I was impressed by this very small amount of takedown defense I was able to see of Francesco Nuzzi recently. And this guy genuinely is so good striking on the feet. I think that he's eventually going to find something. And I do think that he is going to find a knockout. I was very impressed by what I saw from him. He is minus 325 now against Mando Gutierrez. So he's a very big favorite. And I think that he does manage to get the knockout over Mando here. I was quite impressed by the tape that I did watch from him. In the co-main event, we now have Leandro Higo fighting against Josh Rettinghouse. And Josh Rettinghouse is another guy that I hadn't really seen for a while, but he was also on the Ultimate Fighter. He was on the Ultimate Fighter Season 29 when he lost to Brady Highstand. He's also fought for the PFL in the past, but that was when it was known as World Series of Fighting. Of course, this is the Justin Gaethje era of the PFL, I guess you could call it. I think a lot more people might recognize it from Justin Gaethje's rise in the promotion, but now, of course, it's the PFL, and now he's back. And once again, he is back on short notice. This is a short notice replacement matchup again to take on Leandro Higo, and I think given the fact that it is short notice, it increases my confidence in Higo. Josh Rettinghouse is actually a very well-rounded fighter. He's good at striking, he's good at wrestling, he's good at grappling, but he's not amazing at any of those things. He does want to shoot for takedowns. If he is going to have a takedown shot on him, I don't think that his takedown defense is the best. He does have a lot of finishes, but a lot of those finishes are against these guys with not very amazing records. And then whenever he does kind of fight someone that does have a bit of talent, like this Alex McGowan fight you can watch on YouTube, he does get into a little bit of trouble. And he did get into a little bit of trouble at the very end of the third round. Alex McGowan threw up an armbar that looked pretty deep, it looked pretty locked in. And maybe if there was a longer period of time, or maybe if things were a little bit differently, maybe McGowan could have got that. But McGowan hasn't gone on to find too much success. He's actually lost a couple of fights since that matchup, so that performance hasn't aged super well. But that fight pretty much took place with Josh Rettinghouse closing the distance, landing his strikes, getting his takedown attempts off, and eventually getting takedowns and also getting taken down as well in moments as well. And then, of course, when he does fight these lower level guys, I'm just going to kind of say it how it is. He just tries to shoot for takedowns early, ground and pounds them out, or just chokes them out super quickly. Leandro Higo is very good. He had actually fought in the past up at 145 pounds. I think he's definitely a bantamweight. I don't really like him at 145, and I'm glad he's fighting now at 135 for this tournament. He's 36 years old now, which is pretty old, but he doesn't really look his age, because I thought that his performance against James Gallagher was the best performance of his career, honestly, and I thought he looked very good in that matchup. He fought away from home. Of course, he actually fought Gallagher in Ireland, so you can imagine what the crowd was like cheering for Gallagher. And despite showing some weakness to leg kicks in that matchup, because Gallagher was throwing a lot of leg kicks against him, Higo was finding success on the feet. He was finding success with his takedowns. Higo's also very good at finding the back on takedown attempts as well. He did that for a long period of time in the third round against James Gallagher to truly secure the decision. And I think that against Josh Rettinghouse, we can see Leandro Higo go out there. I think he can be the better striker out of the two. And I also think that he can get the takedowns. Rettinghouse, as I said before, hasn't shown the best takedown defense. I think that Higo can go out there and get the takedown against Rettinghouse, who's coming in on short notice. And I think that Higo can find a submission or win a decision here. So I'm going to go with Leandro Higo to win this matchup here in the co-main event. And now in the main event, this is not short notice, to my knowledge anyway. We've got a full camp Taila Santos taking on a full camp Juliana Velasquez. I am picking Taila Santos for the same reason why Liz Carmouche was able to defeat Juliana Velasquez 3 times. All 3 of Juliana Velasquez's losses have come to Liz Carmouche, and they all came in a row, which was kind of hilarious matchmaking from the PFL, I have to say. She had just lost to Carmouche twice, lost her title to Carmouche, and then lost the rematch, and then they just gave her a Carmouche again. She lost to Carmouche the same way all 3 times. And all that tells me is she just was not being able to make those adjustments. She wasn't able to make those improvements in the gym to improve on what it was that was her letting her down in those fights. And that truly is the takedown defense. She was even taken down by this opponent here, Lisa Malden, before eventually getting like a weird reversal, and then she finished her off with that ground and pound. But Velasquez, taken down, controlled, submitted, knocked out by the ground and pound of Carmouche after Carmouche got takedowns. Taila Santos was taking down and controlling not Erin Blanchfield, but Valentina Shevchenko for 2 rounds in that matchup. And Taila Santos, and then of course she did lose to Blanchfield, it was close, has come to the PFL, she's found a lot of success. And I do believe that even though, and yes, this is another thing as well, I forgot about this, she actually had a submission locked in against Liz Carmouche, a rear naked choke locked in against Liz Carmouche in the first round. So she was able to out-grapple Liz Carmouche. She was able to out-grapple the person that was able to out-grapple Velasquez 3 times. Needless to say, I am picking Taila Santos to win this fight. I also believe as well, considering how good Taila Santos is at striking, I think Taila Santos can win the minutes on the feet in this matchup as well. I think no matter really where the fight goes, I think Taila Santos is going to be in control. I think that Taila Santos can control the striking, and I think that Taila Santos can also control the grappling. The only real concern I have about Santos is the reason why I picked Erin Blanchfield to beat her all that time away, is she was kicked out of her gym for some reason or another, and then she started this team Taila Santos, which to my knowledge is just her and her husband training in her garage. So she's not really going to make all that many improvements, and she kind of hasn't really, but she still is showing that she's a world-class athlete, a world-class fighter, And I think at this point now, against a nearly 39-year-old Juliana Velasquez, where momentum just is not on her side at all, where the weakness has been shown to be the takedown defense, I think Taila Santos can go out there, get the takedowns on Velasquez, and then work for a submission. So give me Taila Santos to win this matchup by decision or submission. And I think that Santos goes out there, gets it done, and has a pretty good performance. Let me know what you think in the comments below. And hopefully it all works out for us. Went 7-1 on my PFL picks last week. Hopefully we can go 10-0 this week. And I'll see you guys in the next video.